Right, good afternoon, everyone. We are being recorded. And welcome to the meeting of the City Plans Panel. My name is Councillor Jim McKenna, and I will be chairing today's meeting. Could I remind everyone that today's meeting is being live streamed on the City Council website so that the public can observe the meeting without needing to be present. City Plans Panel deals with applications from the city centre as well as the largest and most significant applications the council receive. The aim of the panel is to hear all relevant information from applicants, members of the public and council officers to help members of the panel make their decisions. Could I now invite members and officers to introduce themselves and mute your microphone once you have done so. If we could start on my left.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Daljit Singh. I lead the City Centre planning team.
Good afternoon, Jessica Ashton, Principal Planner in the Central Team and the Case Officer.
Good afternoon, I'm Lisa Brannan, Principal Engineer, Highways.
Good afternoon, Councillor Katie Dye from Killingbeck and Seacroft Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Caroline Gruen from Bramley and Stanningley Ward.
Hello, Councillor Asgar Khan, Council for Bermatos and Richmond Hill Ward.
Hey up, Councillor Kaylee Brooks, Little London and Woodhouse Ward.
Hello, Councillor Annie Maloney, Beeson Holbeck Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Peter Carlisle, Cavalier Farsley Ward.
Good afternoon, Lewis Foote, Senior Technical Officer, and I'll be in charge of PowerPoint today.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Councillor Colin Campbell.
Good afternoon, Councillor David Blackburn, Farnley and Wortley Ward.
Good afternoon, everybody. Councillor Dan Cohn from the Woodley Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Barry Anderson, Adeline Wharfdale Ward.
Good afternoon, Stephen Varley, Design Officer. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Andy Booth, Clerk to the panel.
Good afternoon, Amy Davis, Legal Officer.
Good afternoon, Jonathan Carr, Head of Development Management.
Thank you for that. Before I move on to the agenda, and now that I've got you all gathered around the table, can I remind you that there is a visit scheduled on the 23rd of October to see for ourselves what shared living might look like. It's very important that we go there. We've only had 6 responses so far, more of you than that around the table. And these applications are coming forward. They are coming forward. We already had one at Selton West where I subbed. So with the low numbers so far response that I have responded, our bus holds 24, I'm led to believe. We are going to open it to other panel members as well, because it may well come forward for them as well. As I said, the first one was actually Selton West application some months ago. David.
I don't remember seeing that. When is it supposed to have come?
I'll just come in as Development Plans Chair. It was actually for Development Plans Panel members, but what we're saying now is we're going to open it up to more than that. But for Development Plans Panel members, if you haven't responded and you want to go, please could you do that? Otherwise, there won't be a seat for you if we open it up to everybody. But we do welcome people coming back to us with that. So it's going to be opened up now. Is it to all plans members, Daljit? Yeah.
Can I just come in? Just a small point. Since we're opening it up to all plans panel members, it will be first come, first served. So once that 24 seat is full, then that'll be it.
Good point. That's a good point. And I know we've got many things in our diaries, but 23rd of October, if you can blank it out and respond, I think it'd be very good if members of City Plans Panel come and attend and have a look for themselves. It's more likely that we will get the first applications and they'll continue to come to this panel. So please think carefully about it. And if you can, make yourself available on the day. It'd be a nice trip out anyway. Okay, back to the agenda. Moving on then to agenda item number 1. Over to you, Andy.
Thank you, Chair. Under item number 1, there have been no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Under item number 2, there's no exempt information on today's agenda. Under item number 3, we've not received any late items. Moving on to agenda item number 4, could I ask members if they've got any interest to declare? No. Moving on to agenda item number 5, there have been no apologies for absence today, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Then can we move on to the minutes of the planning meeting on Thursday, the 10th of August, on page 7. I shall go through in the usual way and then invite comments. Page 7. Page 8. Page 9. Page 10. Page 11. And finally, page 12. Is there any matters arising? I see no hands. Then are we prepared to accept them as a true and correct record? Yep, I see nods around the table. Thank you, Colin. Yeah, I think it's important that we yeah, second. Okay. Can we have a show of hands, please? Because nods aren't always visible. That looks unanimous to me. Thank you for that. Moving on then. Agenda item 7. Jess?
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. So this is land including 16 to 22 Burley Street. And it's a full planning application for a student development of between 6 and 8 stories high, which will provide 183 student bed spaces. The applicant is Torsion, who are a Leeds-based developer. We received the application in April and it's been referred to panel because it's a Leeds City Council owned site where we've had objections from Leeds Civic Trust and the Littlewood House Neighbourhood Forum. So it's a 0.14 hectare site in a kind of wedge shape located between Park Lane to the north and Burley Street to the south. Looking at surroundings, you've got Hanover Square to the north, the Park Lane College, Leeds City College campus over to the east. You've got the Marlboroughs residential estate. You've got some low-rise commercial properties, including the Fox and Newt Public House. There's an office building directly to the south, a telephone exchange to the west, and then Oak House to the northwest is recently completed student accommodation. It's unallocated in the site allocation plan. It is within our city centre boundary. It's within the Littlewood House neighbourhood area. There is a neighbourhood plan in production. It's not a conservation area, but the Hanover Square and Woodhouse Square conservation area sits just to the north of the site. And there's a collection of listed buildings in the southwest corner of Hanover Square. And then up at the top of the screen, Denison Hall is grade 2 star listed building. So just some photographs of the site as it is at the moment, and members who visited this morning on the site visit will recall it's currently occupied by 3-storey red brick buildings with commercial uses at the ground floor. So hot food takeaway, sandwich shop. And hopefully you can see from this slide that there's a significant level change across the site of 3.2 metres, falling from the north across to the south and also from west to east. And you've got back Burley Street that runs through the centre of the site. And then you can see that the northern edge has regenerated over time with self-seeded trees, forming a green vegetation at the edge. And then hopefully from this, these photographs, you can see that it's quite a prominent corner site as you approach from the city centre, but it's in relatively poor condition. So looking at the elevations, this is the southern elevation. So as you look at it from Burley Street, you can see how the development steps up from 6 stories in the west up to 8 stories in the east. There's an accessible roof terrace at the central section. The main entrance is on Burley Street and it's got these active frontages along the ground floor, albeit there are some blank frontages at the western side of the site. And this is looking south, so at the northern elevation, where you can really see the impact of the change in levels, and a significant portion of the ground floor is subterranean at this, as you look at it from this angle. And then looking at the east and western elevations, the development responds to the shape of the site, and you've incorporated a kind of curved feature flat iron corner at the eastern extent. And then the western elevation is effectively blank because it's close to the adjoining telephone exchange. So it's looking at materials, it's 2 complementary tones of brick with soldier course detailing and an attractive kind of glazed tile detailing to add visual interest. Looking at the site plan, the building's been set back 3 meters from the line of the adjacent telephone exchange. So still providing strong building lines along Burley Street and Park Lane. It's accommodated 2 meter wide pavements all around the site, a loading bay to the front of the site, which can be used for servicing, deliveries, pick up and drop off arrangements. We've been mindful not to narrow the carriageway because there's an active travel scheme in preparation where a bi-directional cycle track is going to be introduced to the southern side of Burley Street, along with improvements to pedestrian crossings in the vicinity, and we've sought a contribution through this application. So looking at the ground floor layout, you can see that plant, bin storage and a substation are over on the west of the building. So over this area, cycle storage is towards the rear, and then all along the front are the communal amenity facilities. So a gym, cinema room, games room, a lounge, study area, wellbeing room, dining spaces to provide that kind of activation at a ground floor level all around the main entrance. As we move up the building, this is a typical floors plan for floors 1 to 5, where you've got studio accommodation along a corridor, 2 stair cores, and then at the eastern extent you've got some larger accessible and premium studios. And then as you move up the building, this is the 6th floor, where you see the impact of the step, and there's a green roof with photovoltaics, and accommodation. The next floor up, you can see access to the accessible roof terrace and more accommodation. And then on the roof, there's a scope for photovoltaics. And this is just a close-up of a typical studio within the development, which has a bed, desk, wardrobe, ensuite, kitchen, small kitchen area, an area for seating, and a wardrobe. And then looking at the landscaping plan, you can see that they've accommodated soft landscaping to the north of the site with tree planting and a sort of column shaped trees. At the entrance, at the eastern corner, there's a feature raised bed with incorporated seating and tree planting. And then again, along the south elevation, along Burley Street, there are street trees and some small ornamental trees to mark the main entrance. Here are just some precedent images around the sort of public realm, with images of the type of trees that are proposed and typical seating details. And there's just some more information about the accessible roof terrace, which will provide access to outside space with seating, a pergola, some vertical windscreens to protect and soft planting. And then just some CGIs of the proposed development. So this is looking west along Park Lane. Hopefully, so there's the development. This is looking south from Hanover Square. This is an image along Burley Street, the main entrance. Another image along Burley Street, which provides kind of an appearance of how it will look with. And then to finish, as you approach the development from the city centre, you can sort of get an impression of the curved feature corner. So there's just one update since the report was finalised. We've had some comments from Yorkshire Water, who are seeking to safeguard public sewer assets that are within the site. So they've noted that there are trees proposed within distances of existing sewerage arrangements, but they are proposed to be abandoned as part of this proposal. And they've also noted that there are trees planted within a 5-metre offset of a public sewer, which runs along the south of the site. So in discussion with the applicant, I think that if you incorporate root barriers, there would be the potential to ensure that the sewer is not impacted by the proposal. But it's a technical matter that we're seeking to resolve through our delegated powers in advance of determining the application. So in conclusion, I think it's an opportunity to regenerate a brownfield site which is underused at present in a sustainable location within the city centre, and it's brought to panel with a recommendation to defer and delegate for approval subject to a stage 1 road safety audit, the draft conditions within the report and any others that are suitable to apply, and the completion of a section 111/106 agreement. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess. There are no objectors present to the application. The applicants are in attendance should the panel have any questions of fact. So I will call them forward if that's necessary. Could I now invite members to ask questions of officers? Caroline?
I'll just pick up a few things that came up on site, if that's okay. We were wondering who owns the cobblestones that are on the road running around the site, and whether that's an adopted road or not. And we were also wondering if there are any opportunities to introduce more or better planting and green space, even though it's not a requirement. And I would like to ask if there are any either examples or more close-ups of the material so we can see more easily how it will look, please.
Caroline? Please.
Regarding the cobbles or sets, whichever you wish to call them, my understanding is it's still council-owned land. I'm not sure where the land is vested, but we will investigate. You know that if they're still within highway ownership, we'd probably be looking to reclaim those to use elsewhere. But I will liaise further with my colleagues in Highways Asset Management.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite an important point because A, they're in good condition, and B, they're quite extensive. And we were really hoping they could be incorporated in some of the hard stand that's on the design here, so they weren't moved to another part of the city.
Yeah, I did have a discussion with asset management colleagues, and they said that'd be acceptable in principle, subject to them having somewhere to be located to. So I think we can explore that further. In terms of the question around better planting or more green space, I think it's a constrained site. It's a small site. Our policy indicates that there isn't a requirement to deliver outdoor amenity space within the city centre on sites less than half a hectare. We have worked quite hard to achieve tree-lined streets at each of the boundaries. So in the north, tree planting in the south, and then at that eastern kind of corner. So we have worked hard on that, and we've also noted the existence of outdoor amenity spaces nearby that people could access. So I don't know if it's a question for the applicant about whether you could, if that's the maximum extent.
It would be a question for the applicant, really, wouldn't it? As would the cobblestones used on site. So we'd be interested perhaps to hear from the applicant on those issues. I would say just because it's not a requirement doesn't mean we don't have, you know, we shouldn't try to do something.
And then just coming to your question around materials, there's the slides in the presentation, but we haven't got any samples here at panel, but we are proposing to control that by conditions, so that we approve that through that process.
Yeah, that's fine, but it's just difficult to tell from the presentation actually what it will look like.
I can bring the applicant forward at this time, but there might be more questions of fact. So perhaps we'll get to the end of questions and then invite them to address members' questions. Okay, moving on then, David.
Thanks, Chair. Firstly, I'll mention something the Chair mentioned one site. There's a gap between where the telephone exchange is and the edge of the building, which, if they were closer together, would leave more room for green space. And you said something about fire exits and stuff like that. Can you show us on the diagram, on the drawings, what's stopping us doing that? While you're doing that, also, the thing is it might be a scrappy piece of land, but it has got some biodiversity. I mean, I'm sure that the squirrel that we saw that lives there were quite more happier how it is now than it will be when it's developed. How we checked out that we're improving biodiversity at site as well.
Okay, so just in terms of your first point, my understanding is that the gap, which is here, is a 2-meter gap between the site, the development, and the adjacent telephone exchange, and that provides an access. Yeah, so it's required for access purposes, and I think that's as a result of the levels on the site. So that's my understanding for the purpose of the gap. In terms of biodiversity, yeah, there's been a biodiversity calculation, and that there's a net gain as a result of the development, which our nature team have reviewed, and they've confirmed it complies with our policy. So there's a commensurate net gain following the development.
Thank you, Chair. Just to follow on from Councillor Blackburn, the access at the back of the building, is it being cornered off, or how will you be able to access? Can people access from the main road, Burley Street or Park Lane? That's one. The other question is about crossing on Burley Street at the junction of Park Lane. As you know, it's very, very busy street. And this morning we saw, how busy it was. My question is there any proposal for a crossing, formal crossing, should I say, on Burley Street? And also the junction, Park Lane and Burley Street, is there any bit going to be just new layout? Is it going to be same? Is there going to be any changes there? And do we know how many accidents have taken place on that junction? Because it's a really blind corner there.
Okay. So in terms of first comment around will there be access from the north of the site? The main entrance is from Burley Street, so that's the south of the site. There is an access to Park Lane, but that's just for fire escape purposes. So the access is from Burley Street. And then maybe if I hand over to Lisa around the point of crossings and accidents. Thank you.
So in terms of the crossing, there's no formal crossing provision proposed on Park Lane. There is an informal cross point with drop curbs and tactile pavings proposed as part of the highway works. In terms of the junction, they have demonstrated they can achieve the required visibility at the junction, and there will be a small area of the land within the site dedicated as highway to provide a wider footway around the front of the building, and the building is set back so that the visibility there can be obtained there. In terms of collisions, there are, in the last 5 years, there's been 5 collisions with slight injuries, some mostly involving pedestrians, 1 cyclist and 1 car passenger. There was a collision with serious injury of a cyclist in 2016, but nothing since then of a serious nature.
Thank you. Sorry, I was just opening up my questions. So one of them was about reuse of the materials of the buildings that are currently standing there. Has any consideration been given to what could be salvaged and recycled from the site? Another question about the proposed roof terrace. In the document, it says that it'll be accessible only between certain hours. Is it up to 11 p.m, something like that? Does that mean there will be 24-hour staff on site to supervise that? And another question, it mentions that solar PV will take up 12% of the energy requirement of the building. And what's the proposal for the other 88%? And then probably the last one, on page 14 of the document, it says that the proposal includes car parking, but surely that's not true. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your questions. No, I think there's no car parking proposed, so I don't know if that's just a typo in the report, so apologies about that. I don't know if it'd be appropriate to bring the applicant in around the proposed reuse of the materials and the on-site supervision. Maybe they could speak to that if that's okay. And similarly with the energy strategy for the building, if that's okay.
Thank you, Jess. I have noted the questions. I was waiting until members had so they'll come forward and could deal with all matters at one go. any further questions from members? Kaylee, please.
Thanks, Chair. 11.4 in the report, it's a matter that the Civic Trust has raised regarding the entrance of the scheme being flipped to the northern side, but also I've got concerns about the drop-off point being where it's proposed to be. I'm just wondering if there's more information around why that's not possible to do, because as has already been said, the road is quite busy. So obviously if you were to have pick up and drop off around the other side, then it might not be, I'm not going to say dangerous, but it might reduce issues in the future.
I think what we've done is we've commented on what the application that's been presented to us, which is for the entrance to be on the southern side, and in our view it is acceptable for and the loading bay has been, you know, tracked, etc. So we are happy that it's acceptable in highways terms to be on the southern side.
Yeah, the applicant has advised that it's primarily in response to the level change in the site that they've incorporated the main entrance at the Burley Street elevation. I think notwithstanding, you know, the Civic Trust's helpful feedback, I think you would have to have an entrance and then go down to the ground floor facility, so it's an inefficient use of the site. You'd have to lose accommodation. So I think there are merits to having the front of the building facing Burley Street. I think that's the main. It feels a bit at the back of the development on Park Lane in our view. So I think in terms of the principle of it, we were subject to highways being happy. We were happy with the kind of main entrance being to the southern elevation.
Thanks. I mean, I'm not convinced, but I've just got another question around GP capacity. What is GP capacity of the GPs around the area? Does anyone have that data?
Sorry, Councillor, we don't have that data. We did consult Public Health and Health Partnership, but they haven't commented on the applications.
Okay, but I mean, if capacity for health is not adequate in the area, then how, like, if we don't have the data, how do we know how it's going to impact on health capacity?
So I think in the report we do note that you're very well located for the hospital, and there's all the facilities within the university, but I say we haven't specifically looked at GP capacity. My understanding is that it's planned for by the I don't know, I haven't got.
I think members will be aware that there's a wider, more strategic discussion taking place with health partners, because it's not the council that provides these facilities, and we can't insist on developers providing these facilities. Developers often provide commercial space which can be used for these kind of facilities, but it's for the health partnerships and the commissioning groups where they want to do that. They are doing a wider piece of strategic work to see what the demands are in different parts of the city. But what we have done in the meantime is endeavoured to consult them, but we can't force them to comment. So in this particular case, they haven't commented. We're not aware of any particular concerns that would create a public issue in planning terms. So that's the full information that we have. Thank you, Chair.
Can we leave it there? Or maybe you, when we have the developers on, you could.
Well, I mean, the developers aren't going to be able to answer the
Not
question
really.
because I doubt that they've got the data either. But it's disappointing to hear that we haven't got that data, because the feedback that I'm getting from residents is that people can't get in CGPs. So
Get Peter, please. Sorry. Dan. Dan jumps in. Okay.
I'll ask the question that I know Peter was dying to ask, really. So could just really following the back Kaylee's comment, if we are concerned around the health provision, is that a relevant planning consideration?
Okay. We get an answer from Dalji.
Yeah, I think if there was demonstrable evidence that a particular proposal would create planning issues in the area because of an impact on a particular facility, then that is of consideration. But we'd have to have that evidence.
Yeah, Chair, I think this crops up regularly at Plans Panel, doesn't it? The issue of healthcare provision within the locality, and often we say that it is technically it's market led in terms of the health providers would respond to that. But as Daljit's mentioned, there is a wider piece of work going on about what level of provision is required across the city. So I think as you've identified that, it'd be difficult for us to actually not approve something because we have concerns about the level of GP provision within a specific area. But it is a concern that's noted.
if I may, Chair, in 10.2 of the pack, it does state new housing development will be acceptable in principle on non-allocated land, providing that the number of dwellings does not exceed the capacity of transport, education, and health infrastructure as existing or provided as a condition of development. So I'm baffled as to why health hasn't been considered for this. Seems quite important to me. Thank you.
Yeah, I was trying to, I hadn't quite understood the answer to my question, so I was trying to get some clarification. Because I take Kaylee's point, but what Daljit is saying is, yes, it is a material planning consideration, something we can and should be taking into account. And then what you're saying is, but with no evidence it's a problem. I think what Kaylee's making is we have no evidence it's not a problem. And we're saying we believe it might be a problem. So I suppose what I'm saying is, am I accurate in my assumption or my understanding that the fact that we don't have evidence that allows us to be reassured on a point means that we're quite entitled to reach a decision on basis of the evidence we have before us?
It's up to Plans Panel what weight they put on different aspects of the scheme. So it's a consideration. It's not the only consideration. We have the development plans panel, development plan policies to lead us. The development plan policies do not say that there's a particular infrastructure issue here. There are some strategic policies, as Councillor Brooks has just highlighted, which talk about infrastructure provision generally in the area. But in this particular case, we've consulted with public health partnerships. We haven't had any comments back. I'm assuming that if there was an issue, they would have come back to us. The other evidence that we have is, I suppose, you have from your surgeries and from constituency feedback, but that's not, as far as I'm aware, then manifested itself in terms of empirical evidence. So I think it's for members to decide what weight to give that context. We as officers have taken an overall view and provided a recommendation report. If members think that's a particular issue for them, that's for them to decide.
Thank you, Daljit. Colin, did I see your hand up? No? With your permission, can I invite the applicant to come forward and perhaps address the questions that we were unable to deal with? If you come forward, please. Welcome. I assume you might be Richard Frothers, is that right?
That's correct, Chair. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I made a list, but I shall bring the members in if I missed something. The first question, and it was raised a few times, was the cobbles. What's going to happen to them? Could there be more planting and samples that would have been useful had you brought something along? Those were from Councillor Gruen. So if you could address those first, please.
Sorry. In terms of cobbles, I think, as has been pointed out, at the moment, it's a council asset. But I think from the developer's point of view, we are very happy to do what we can in terms of the construction process and everything else to retain those cobblestones. And again, and we're also quite happy to explore options in which we can incorporate at least some of them within the hard landscaping around the scheme. That's no concern at all from us. In fact, you know, we can see the merits in that. So we're happy to look at that. Trees and landscaping, I think, as officers have referenced, Chair, it is a very constrained site, and we have sought to maximise what we can within the confines of the site in terms of landscape provision. We originally did propose a greater volume and a different species of trees in the area to the north of the site along Park Lane, but through negotiations, we've agreed a solution with a lower number of trees, but a higher quality and more mature specimens along that frontage. But we've retained the same area, so we will still have lower level planting in that area. But in terms of tree planting, that's what, you know, we've been able to do in terms of maximising what we've provided. And what was the other question in the three, Chair? The materials, yeah. I think we did have an exchange with officers about this recently in a discussion. At the moment, because we haven't got to that detailed level of architectural design, we haven't nailed on. So it would have been improper, I think, today to have brought samples along when we've still to go through that final process. But I think that there are various schemes in the local area. In fact, one of Torsion's, which is just down the road from where you were today, which is one option in terms of the brick finish that we were looking at. And we could provide more details on that to follow from the committee. And again, as the officers have said, there is a comprehensive condition in there in terms of not just sample panels, but samples being erected on site and everything else to be agreed prior to construction work starting. But we're very happy, you know, to issue out and provide references to those further examples if needs be.
Richard, Councillor Gruen, is that okay?
Yes, thank you. I welcome the response on the cobbles. That's very good news. Thank you.
Okay, the next one I've got, I think, was from Councillor Khan regarding the gap. Obviously, if it was able to be up close to the telephone exchange as the buildings are now, you would have what you mentioned, two different measurements, 3 meters and 2 meters.
2 meter gap.
It's a 2 meter gap. Okay. So please, if you could address that one for us.
Sorry, Chair. The gap, so the 2 meter gap, there's a number of reasons for that. I think there's a practical issue of actually being able to construct the building whilst the telephone exchange is in place. But But I think, but primarily, and as officers have referenced, we have got various fire escapes, which are located down to the rear of the building and the side of the building. And we, because of the levels changes, the only means by which to actually get out away from the building via those fire escapes is around that western edge. So we have to maintain that passage there for fire escape purposes, unfortunately, because the levels are such that we can't take them out the other way onto Park Lane. And I think there's also reference. I think we'd be looking to have that kind of some form of gated access, so that there'll be no access for anybody apart from maintenance purposes from Burley Street around that corridor. So it will be secure. But then, obviously, in the event of a fire or anything, that will be released so that people can access quickly and easily.
And I think it was Councillor Khan who talked about a crossing, which we observed on the site. There was quite a lot of student movement from the other student accommodations in the area. Could you address that one, please? Do you think there is a need for a crossing? Some members clearly do.
Yes, Chair, I remember this time. I think what we've looked at an informal crossing. So we've moved things around in terms of enhancing the pavement widths as the scheme wraps around onto Park Lane around there. And we have looked at, or we have introduced an informal dropped crossing there where the sight lines permit. We have considered and looked at formal crossing points, but I think that the view we took was that the primary, apart from crossing over Park Lane, the primary sort of drivers of movements are kind of the east-west direction of travel, which is where we've provided that informal crossing. I think to provide something more formal introduces more complications, more kind of informal hazards and things, and I think that's why we've steered away from it. We've got the lay-by in there, which is new. We've got the sight lines which we've introduced in relation to that lay-by. We've got the informal crossing points along that way to look at Park Lane, but we've steered away. And obviously there's we don't know yet the full details of the cycle route which has been proposed along the southern side of Burley Street and how that's going to interact with pedestrian movements across there. Which is another reason why we haven't gone down that route of a formal crossing. Chair.
I'll bring highways in at this stage, but please remain. There's some more questions.
Whilst at the moment the proposal only introduces like a very straightforward drop crossing on Park Lane at the junction with no changes to the footway on the opposite side of the road, there could be scope, if members think that's appropriate, to narrow the junction by doing a build out on where it joins on the diagonal, to narrow the crossing distance on that desire line. I'm happy to have that further discussion with the applicants if that is something that members think they'd like to see.
Thank you. That's a very useful comment. Oh, sorry. I'm sure that discussion will take place. It does seem sensible, but obviously road safety and pedestrian safety is paramount. Are you okay with those answers, Councillor Khan?
Yeah, Chair, partly I am. But as you know, you've got landscaping at the front of the building. What type of landscaping will be taking place? And you said you're going to be planting some trees at the front as well also. Will that be will it have a clear visible for motorists?
Yeah, so we've looked at the landscaping, particularly on that corner and along the Burley Street frontage, has been the subject of extensive discussions between the applicants, planning officers, highways officers and landscape officers. So all of that's been factored in. So yeah, we are looking at kind of tall stem trees. They're actually all sited outside the sight line anyway, but the tall stem trees, so there'll be no interference with sight lines for vehicles or pedestrians along that side.
Councillor Brooks raised roof terrace and the hours of operation. So please, if you could address that. And the drop-off point was yours as well, wasn't it? It could be somewhere else. And I think the medical one we've gone as far as we can on that. But if you'd come to the roof terrace, please, on the drop-off point. We have heard reasons why it's necessary to be there or it's desirable to be there, but it'd be useful if you could add further comments to it.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, yeah. So the roof terrace. Yeah, so we've got and encouraged a condition which strictly limits the hours. So it will be closed, and I think it is 11 p.m. You have to forgive me because I've been looking at a couple of schemes and it varies between 10:30 and 11 p.m. But it's in there, and I think we've got a condition. I think we've also got a management plan which will be secured, which covers various things, including moving out procedures, but will also cover use of that terrace and kind of limit the types of activities which will go on there. But so very similar to what we'll see across the city in terms of some of the build to rent schemes as well as the student schemes. In terms of the lay-by location, the location of the access, I think there are three probably key reasons why we have sought to focus that on the southern, on Burley Street rather than Park Lane. I think as officers of reference, there's the levels issue and the inefficiencies that bringing people in at first floor level, then having to have the amenity space below that because you've got the subterranean spaces down there which aren't suitable for living conditions, etc. There's the potential conflict with the road junction coming out of Hanover Square and the interface there with having the traffic. And there's also obviously that we've sought to, as far as we possibly can, reintroduce the existing green tree coverage in that location, which again, I think all parties were keen to avoid losing that in favour of a lay-by access in that location, Chair. I think they're the primary drivers for the scheme as it is in that respect.
Richard, are you okay with that, Councillor Brooks?
I'm just wondering what, because it says in the papers for the purposes of entertaining. I'm hoping that's not just going to be like parties. So because I mean, if it's closing at 11 p.m. And music isn't allowed, for example, then that's a lot more acceptable than closing at 11 p.m. and residents being allowed to have, speakers and things up there.
Yeah, Councillor, I think to be clear, it will be basically the roof terrace will be closed at 11 p.m. So no access whatsoever after 11 p.m.
But what kind of entertaining would be permitted? So would people be allowed to go up there and take like a music player? Would that be allowed, or would it be just quiet gatherings only?
I think at the moment, I don't think, well, there's nothing in this scheme at the moment in terms of facilities for actual audio-visual kind of facilities or anything like that up there. So it will be quite from that. I think the management plan as drafted doesn't get into those specifics in terms of the uses, but again, I think from the developers, applicants, managers perspective, I think they don't want there to be they need to manage the nuisance on here potentially to neighbours and everybody else as much as anybody else does. So I think we could look at refining the management plan to be more specific about what is and isn't acceptable on that terrace, and that will be conditioned into the planning permission.
Is that helpful, Kaylee? Okay, but I did note the offer of refining the management plan to be more specific in hours of use and what it can be used for. I think it's my last. It was Councillor Dye who talked about photovoltaic and energy consumption. Does that cover yours, or do you want to put them directly to Richard, please?
Well, it was about the other 88%, and it said that solar PV was going to make up 12%.
Yeah, so I think we've got solar PV on there. I think that there is scope for air source heat pumps for some of it as well, where we've got a limited amount of kind of wet heating, but that it will be primarily it's not gas fired, so there's no gas in there. It's an electric based system. So at the moment it will be mains electric, supplemented by the PV. But obviously, as is set out in the report, starting from obviously work to the latest and improvements over the latest building regs in terms of efficiency and use and demand. But in terms of, so what we've got on the scheme at the moment is the PVs take us beyond the existing policy requirement. There's scope for, some limited air source heat pump as well on there. But there's not a great deal of physical scope on the building when we've taken into account the green roof and the terrace to get much more on there.
Can I ask my others? Can I ask my other questions, please? Thank you. Well, one of them was linked to the roof terrace question, which you have addressed, but just a clarification, that does that mean that there'll be on-site staff present 24 hours a day? And then the other one was about the use of the materials from the existing buildings. Do you have plans to recycle? To what kind of plans do you have regarding those?
So in terms of staffing, it will probably vary. So there won't be 100% somebody on site 24 hours a day necessarily. But I think the way the management plan will work is that there will be staff available at core periods, and there will be staff available to enforce the close down of the roof terrace, for example. They won't necessarily be there on site for all of the time thereafter, but it will be, so the roof terrace will be physically closed so that it cannot be accessed. So the fobs will be basically disengaged to gain access to the roof terrace beyond those hours. The applicants, Torsion, so they operate they've got a number of schemes in the local area. So the kind of staff will be managed across those, so they're all within a short distance of each other. So if things arise, there are systems in place so that people can be on site. But I think in terms of management and associated with the terrace in particular, then hopefully that addresses that query. In terms of reuse of materials, I think as a matter of course, the contractors, whether they can reuse them on this site or another development site, they will do what they can to reuse in terms of the bricks, in terms of using that for hardcore and things on other sites and materials. I think it's going to be the bricks probably primarily, which they will be able to reuse for those purposes. I think some of the other bits and pieces in the building probably aren't practically going to be able to be reused. But yes, I think as a matter of course, it's in their interests to be able to salvage what they can, to reuse where they can use it on one of their other construction sites, even if it isn't this one.
Thank you. I think that exhausts the list that I've got in front of me anyway. Is there any further questions before we thank Councillor Campbell?
Mine's for officers, Chair.
Can I thank you, Richard, for coming forward and dealing with those questions? I'm sure there'll be some extra conditions from what you've said to tighten it up a little bit. But thank you for your time. Councillor Campbell, there was a question to officers. Yep.
It's a highways question, actually, picking up from the point you made about the informal crossing, which is just a drop curb. And I the best will in the world, I can't see students using that particularly. In fact, we threw ourselves across the road today, didn't we? And you talked about narrowing the gap, for want of a better word. Have any pedestrian counts been done on that junction to see whether it actually merits a proper crossing?
I'm not aware that we have counts at that junction, but I can have a look and I can check whether there are, but I don't think there have been any counts done at the junction in terms of movements. I don't think there's no proposals to, because I think it's to provide a crossing at the junction, you really need to signalise the whole junction. And I'm not sure that it merits that, but I'll certainly, we can revisit what if there are any counts. But I'm not aware that there have been.
Councillor Groom, please.
I just wondered if you could just tighten up on that point for me. I didn't know you had to signalise, fully signalise every single crossing.
No, you don't, but if you're putting in a controlled crossing, it has to be a certain distance from the junction if it's a standalone crossing. So, and also the geometry of that junction is quite problematic, because if you put it too far up the hill, you've lost the pedestrian sight lines round the corner. So it probably introduces more danger, more hazards potentially, than having it as an informal crossing meeting the desire line. But to put something in as a controlled crossing, crossing at that junction, it would need to be set back from the junction to be a standalone pedestrian crossing without signalising the whole junction.
Could you not put a zebra crossing in?
Again, the zebra crossing would need to be set back several metres from the junction itself. And therefore the question is, could you meet the sight lines round the corner, but also would it be used if it's not on the direct desire line?
I mean, I understand what you're saying, but I did feel quite exposed this morning. And I did think at other times of day that road might be very, very busy. And for anybody who perhaps is a slow walker or disabled, I think it's dangerous.
I will have another chat with our traffic engineers and see what their view is. Certainly, I think there's definitely scope to narrow that wide flare, the wideness of it. And that would then also slow traffic down on the approach coming down Park Lane. And I think that's probably the best solution for the junction, but I take your point.
Thank you for that, Lisa. Can we move on to comments? I see more questions. Comments, please. Colin.
No, Caroline, if you want to go first. No, Caroline, pray.
Can you just run me through the slides that show the CGI of the external appearance of the building, please? Yeah. And if you could show me any others on the, yeah.
Don't look accurate to me.
You see, I do have a concern because I don't think those CGIs really show you how tight that site is and how near and high other buildings are. It feels a bit when I went to the site this morning, I thought, crikey, a great big building like that crammed in on this very tiny footprint with other buildings very close. It felt a bit claustrophobic, and I don't think that comes over on those CGIs, personally. I mean, you can see the white shadow of a large, tall building to the right of that slide, but it's deliberately made so that you don't really look at that. And it didn't feel like that picture this morning when I stood there. So my comment would be, it's very cramped.
Colin, please.
Thank you, Chair. Bear with me, because I once again I shall admit to it's a problem when you let members go on site visits, because they actually see things that they might not have picked up. I suppose the question, there are two questions. One is, well, several questions. One is a student block on at this location appropriate? And I know we've discussed at length whether we're getting too many of these purpose-built or whether we're not, or what balance is. But I suppose, given that we don't actually have a policy other than housing mix, I'm not sure whether the concerns that I think I'm beginning to have about this particular area along the Burley Road and adjacent streets, about the sheer volume of student accommodation. Everything around you, apart from the pub, are student flats. Now, I know students have to live somewhere, and there we are. So I am somewhat concerned about that. So that's one of the flags, red flags, that's coming up in my thinking in regard to this. Now, I appreciate that it's a council site, and I appreciate that we'd like to sell it because we need the money. But I do worry that the proposal is substandard, quite frankly, for a variety of reasons. We did touch, and we have touched on more than one occasion, on the highways issues around here. And that I am not convinced we have a clear and accurate picture, particularly around pedestrian movements at this junction. When we were on site today, there were a lot of students wandering about. And I suppose you could say students don't get up till 11 o'clock in the morning, but you know, in the totality of students wandering about on what is a very busy road worries me. And it worries me that we don't have any clear indication about either the numbers or the effect on those junctions of students crossing. We touched on 10.2, Kaylee raised it. And again, I'm slightly concerned that we never seem to be able to quantify those points. So 10.2 talks about public transport, it talks about health, and yet we never seem to be able to quantify any of those figures. We just assume that they'll be met, or in this case, somebody else will come back to us and say it's right. You will not be surprised to know that I'll talk about the landscape and amenity space. Well, landscape in particular. Now, when we went on site, the first thing that struck me was how many trees there were there already. Okay, to a layperson, it looks a bit scruffy, and that's probably because the cleansing people have never been down there for the last 50 years, so it's awash with rubbish. But actually, self-seeded woodland, wooded areas like that are incredibly rare habitat within the city centre. And you stole my thunder about the squirrel, but there must be enough biodiversity on that site to keep that squirrel going, and a few of its mates, presumably. And what we're basically doing is, we're taking that out, we're going to plant some trees, and then we're going to buy the rest out. And the comment about biodiversity net gain is slightly disingenuous, in my opinion, sorry, in that we only get the biodiversity net gain with the buyout. And as I think, as Councillor Brooks has said, we can't get any more trees on Burley Park. Currently, it looks like the Amazon jungle up there. Apparently, we've got so many trees planted. So I worry that we're actually not gaining anything because this money is just sitting there in somebody's account. The amenity space for residents, in my opinion, is effectively non-existent. And if you look around that area about where would you go, it's this, you know, I say this every time about the student flats, don't I? If it's a sunny evening in June, where are you going to go and sit out? And there isn't anywhere there. That's a very busy road. You've got the maximum crammed on the site you possibly can. There is no amenity space. The other thing I noticed just leafing through is if you look at 10.3.1, it admits that what you notice when you look at the drawings, that the space for each individual student is at the minimum end of what we've accepted in the past. Now, we've been quite clear, haven't we, that in effect, students are human beings and need some space. And we're actually pushing people into really, really tiny rooms here. These are only up to 20 square meters. And if you notice, the developer says, well, we'll get over that problem by making everything 3/4 size. So it's a 3/4 bed. The ones over the road, they've got space for a double bed, for example. That's the standard across the city, except here where it's substandard, in my opinion. And then we finally come on to the design. And I'm sorry, but every time we get a building that's got effectively triangular shape, somebody raises the issue of the Flatiron building. This is nothing like the Flatiron building, quite frankly. The quality of the design is, in my opinion, well, I describe it as uninspired. Now, it's a prominent location. You get views from all angles on this one. I believe any designer with any architect with a bit about them could create something that looked much better. This is just a bog standard block, bricks or render or whatever it might be. It's an off-the-shelf design. Now, Mr. Varley will do his usual thing at this point by saying, well, it is what it is. And it is what it is. It's a block for students to go in, to cram students in, but it could be so much better. So I suppose I'm going to ask you, Stephen, from a design point of view, is this as good as it can get?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor. Blunt answer, no. Every design can always be better, and you can keep reworking it and you can keep getting it better. But that's part of design iteration. You eventually reach a point where you're balancing off time, money, work, etc. And the client eventually says, enough is enough. I can't afford any more. Stop it. You know, we could, I fully am on board with your feelings. I get the sense we could. I appreciate it's a council site and the social implications of dealing with that, but, and I'm loath to say this, it's not my place, but if members were to instruct further discussions with the applicants, I'm sure you described it as uninspired. And in some senses, I can see why. We can have another look at it for you and see where we go to move the next stage of the uplift. You with me? It is a standard modernist, you know, there's no base. I don't like giving design answers off pat. It doesn't do me any favours. If members were to so instruct, then let me have another discussion with the applicants and we'll see where we can get it for you. It's not a total disaster, you know, it is what it is, what it says on the tin.
I was waiting for you to say that.
Right, yeah. You know, it is what it is on the tin. It's stacked mass student housing. You know, what we don't want to be going into is pretending it's something else. You know, so I will have a look for you, Councillor. If your colleagues and yourself are minded to so instruct it, then we'll do what we can for you. Thank you.
Well,
thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Stephen.
Notwithstanding my view about the rest of it, I think that's useful. I will pick you up on a point you made as when we came back to the Civic in the bus. We came round the corner about next to the new block, and you said, I think we should be proud of that one. It's a nice building. It's well designed. You can't say that about this one.
If you're going to criticize me, that's probably the nicest thing where you could do it. But okay, views have been heard. Any final comments, or are we ready to move on? No final comments. Can I ask?
Sorry, Chair.
Del-
Sorry. We are inclined, I think, to so instruct for the design to be further considered.
Kaylee?
If everyone's minded to ask for the design to be further considered, can I request that GP capacity numbers are sought out, please?
All those comments were picked up by the Chief Officer. Can I ask Dalgid, please, to comment at this stage before we move to the vote?
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of the comments that have been made, clearly there are some concerns about the design. There's a request that we consider the position on health infrastructure again, and try and get some more information on the existing situation. Although there's been discussion, I'm not clear as to what, if anything, further can be done on the crossing issue. I noted from our highways colleagues that there's potential for narrowing the flare out of Park Lane, but that's probably as far as it goes, because otherwise we're into a situation, because of the geometry of the site, where the only way to get crossings in is to signalise the whole junction. Apart from that, I think the other matters that members have raised in terms of samples, materials, those are matters that can be adequately dealt with at a later point in the process. Members who have been here for a few years know that at condition discharge stage, we have gone on site to view large scale sample panels. And in terms of the standard of accommodation, I think that was a point raised by Councillor Campbell, space standards. I didn't hear any other comments from any other members. So I think, in summary, my summary is that the instruction we've got is to relook at the design, consider the health infrastructure, and look at the pedestrian crossing improvement issue. Thank you, Chair.
The possibility for more planting?
We can look at the possibility of more planting. Okay, thank you.
I think it'd also be sensible to be looking at the pedestrian numbers, as was mentioned earlier. Like, if that's not something that we've got access to now, if we could get hold of that, that would be good.
I'm sorry, I do hope if members and my colleagues will forgive me, but as they say, everything's a learning process. Will we be deferring this one cycle? Because the reason I ask,
I think I'll stop there, because quite frankly, I was going to propose a deferral. We still have the motion before us, but if there's anything you want to add apart from that, please.
Well,
do.
I was going to say, the unfortunate point we get is that I just change hat and go back a few decades to private practice. I am well minded that if members, and we've had this, vote this as an approval, my standard answer is no, I'm not altering the design. The members have approved it. Just send me the approved drawing stamp. Thanks very much. Bye. You know, it can be very difficult for me if you actually approve it. You with me?
Members will make their own mind, but thank you for those helpful comments. Caroline, can I bring you in? And can I say I would not be unhappy if you moved to deferral.
Okay, so I'm going to suggest a condition about the cobbles, and I move a deferral.
Without further ado, then, all those in favour of deferring this for the list that Dalgid has ring out, please show your hands. Yep. Okay, I can see one abstention. Is it an abstention, Colin?
No, I'm going to, well, I yes, for the benefit of the meeting, I will abstain, but I will reiterate my comment in relation to the space. Now, you know, I go on and on and on about space, and these are substandard flats.
I know you do, but we have them all over the city on 20 square meters, and I'm sure Dalgid can, or John can enlarge on that.
I don't want to get into a long argument. We may have them, but it's nothing to be proud of.
We want abstention that was clearly carried for the deferral. Okay. With that in mind, can I thank you for your attendance? And the next meeting is when, Andrew? It's on 2nd of November. Yes. Do you want to say anything? No. Okay. Safe journey home.